Hello, parents, coaches, administrators, athletes. Welcome back in. Thanks for joining us here for a kind of deep dive scenario on anti-fragility for athletes. Up to this point, we've covered basically what is anti-fragility, a couple different frameworks to help you: well-being, resilience, performance, right? How do we work on well-being, resilience, and performance? Top down, bottom up, outside in. You want more details on those, check out some of our earlier episodes or the Anti-Fragile podcast. Today, we're going to start deep diving into subcomponents of anti-fragility. So when we start to assess ourselves, when we start to try to train to build some of these things, what are the different concepts, or in scientific language, constructs, we would use to identify what matters, right? And then measure it and try to build it and measure it in kind of an ongoing way so that we know we're making progress. We're going to make the argument that we've broken these down into a set of 7. Each one of them deserves their own due. So today we'll really just focus on one, which is the idea of awareness and attention. We'll start out here by just providing basic definitions, but really what we want to do is give really tangible examples of where awareness and attention might show up for your athletes, right, in the course of their competition. And then, of course, most importantly, how we might start helping the athlete in your life, or if you're the athlete yourself, become better at awareness and attention. Okay, so here we go. Let's start with like kind of basic definition, just a sentence or two. Adam, lay it out for us, starting with awareness. What does it mean to be aware of something?
So when I think of awareness, I think of a very broad, encompassing state of being conscious of our internal and our external existence.
Perfect. So internal, external. Internal, what we call interoceptive. External, what we call exteroceptive, right? Let's break down some scenarios where an athlete might find themselves either leveraging or maybe succumbing to different levels of awareness. Okay? So let's start, and maybe we categorize them the way you just did, which is internal and external. So good examples of what let's say one of your baseball players for the Nats might need to be interoceptively aware of, say when they step up to the plate or the pitcher's mound or whatever it might be.
So the first thing I want them to be aware of is basically their heart rate. I want to understand if they are in an optimal zone. Now that doesn't mean it has to be corrected or we have to necessarily bring it down to a lower level. That's kind of what we used to do, I think, back in the early days in psychology. I think now we've got to the point where it's recognize, accept, and then refocus our attention on something that's task relevant and contextually important. But at the same time, that doesn't mean to ignore it. So along with heart rate, often what you'll see is a higher heart rate means higher sympathetic drive, which means often more tension. So another factor I want to understand is like, are you feeling overly tense or rigid right now? Because once you're too rigid or tense, it's very hard to execute a fluid motor pattern. Or see patterns, or see patterns externally, right? That's like cognitively, and somatically, right? It affects us holistically.
Okay. So heart rate, tension, might be sweaty palms, it might be rate of breath, right? Those sorts of things, but things that are that are happening internally that allow the athlete to understand the state they are in, right? And if you tune in previous weeks, maybe they're red light, yellow light, green light, but either way, they have some sort of way of assessing their internal kind of state and scoreboard and potentially adjusting from there. What about externally? What would you ask one of your athletes to be aware of?
So when I think about external awareness, it's about, like I say, what is the context? Are you in your present moment? Right? Often people find themselves focusing on anywhere but other than the situation they're in. So they're worrying about past play, they're worrying about the future outcome. But the reality is, if I have a player coming up, he better know how many outs are on the scoreboard. He better know how many people are on base. He better know who's pitching. He better know what they're throwing today and what they're throwing well, and having certain expectations on how to react accordingly. So the idea is that we're environmentally or situationally aware, allows us to be more reactive and present moment focused.
Okay, so simple examples here. What we're talking about is emotional regulation, state regulation, understanding context better, understanding tactics better, right? Becoming better at interacting with other human beings because we're more aware of what's going on with them, or mood, or tone, or body language, right? But it's increasing the general awareness of internal and external so that we can manipulate well-being, performance, and resilience. Now the question is how, right? Parents, athletic directors, coaches, athletes, where do they get started if they want to improve their general awareness?
So particularly, let's take the example of a batter, right?
Okay.
Training awareness starts way before they get into the box, right? From what we call it's in the hole. It's like when you're actually on the bench and you know you're getting up to bat. So what I tell people to do is like you're never mindless. There's always something to do. So I want them searching for new information particularly about the pitcher. I want to see a new perspective in terms of how are you looking to release pitches. I want you to see his move to first base. I want you to see how he's reacting to different scenarios with other batters in the box, what pitches he's relying on, what's he throwing well that day. All this, the idea is rather than getting a rigid adherence to your patterns or internal focus, I'm externally focusing your awareness to the situation outside of yourself that's going to form you with more data so that once you get up at the plate, you have all this unconscious information that you can respond to reflexively based upon your talent and your intuition.
So the idea here, search for novelty, right? Practice paying attention to new things. Great, awesome, love it. Even before that, how can they improve their ability to even become aware that they should be looking for more things, right? Or novel things, right? Like baseline awareness, what would be the practice or action steps?
The way I challenge athletes all the time, it's like much harder to go through life mindless than mindful, right? So we are in this state of automatic or habitual engagement with just normal practices, right? That are just kind of how we do things on autopilot. So I asked them to, thoughtlessness. And I asked them to bring thoughtfulness to everything they do, not in an obsessive way, not in an overly rigid way, in a fun way, but in a way that also brings some novelty and new ways of experiencing things that we do on a regular basis, whether it's brushing your teeth, cleaning up the dishes, engaging with your parents, sisters, loved ones, and so forth. But the idea is, how are you overlooking new information that's possible based upon your own old narratives and limited perspectives that you do automatically every day?
Well, it might be new information, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. Like what I took from what you just said is not necessarily the pursuit of novelty, but just the total immersion in one thing. Right? So if you can practice mindfulness, mindfully drinking the cup of coffee, having the bowl of cereal, mindfully lifting the weights, right? Mindfully throwing the ball, whatever it is, right? If you can do those things more consistently in a mindful way, monotasking it, fully submersing in it, right? Then ultimately I think that's going to raise your baseline ability to catch thoughts, catch feelings, right? Be more mindfully present when you do send them up to whatever it was you called it, in the hole, right? And you ask them to be searching for more information, right? So just getting into the habit, it sounds like, I hesitate to use that word because it's automatic, getting into consistent behavior that allows you to be fully immersed in the thing you're doing. Not thinking forward, not thinking retrospectively, totally present.
The primary problem with all this is being caught up in thoughts about the past or the future and reducing your awareness in the present environment and your present experience. So everything we're trying to do is to, get you in your shoes in the here and now without judgment, pure experience.
You're thinking about the future, we got to mindfully bring our attention back. You're thinking about the past, got to mindfully bring our attention back. You get distracted by something in your external environment, got to mindfully bring the attention back, right? And so then maybe there's our good segue into attention, but let's just quick summarize. What we're talking about is really two major approaches. Number one, do everything you possibly can more mindfully, right? Practice being fully immersed in the moment. As you raise your ability to be more mindful, take that mindfulness and use it to search for novelty in experiences or environments, especially old experiences and environments, right? That novelty will help pull you or your student athlete in. Right? So now attention. So we become more aware. To me, that's the first step in increase or more deliberate attention, right? What do we mean by attention? How is it maybe slightly different than awareness?
So I think they're often conflated, and it's important that we make the distinction because there is one, and it's significant. What we're talking about attention, we're talking about a cognitive process of selectivity. We're concentrating on one aspect of the environment, particularly as an athlete, that what I say is contextually relevant or task relevant. So it can be divided into multiple types. It could be focused, it could be sustained, it could be selective, right? But really understanding the difference between the two because it's important, particularly when it comes to performance.
So can we understand whether we're focused or unfocused, the potential depth of that focus, right, or sustainability of that focus, and then can we do something to take action steps to either sustain it, right, or even deepen it? And so that could be, I'll often separate it for people, it might be reactive or preventative. So preventative is what can you do to the structure of your life, to the environment you surround yourself with, so that you don't have things pulling your focus from what actually matters, right? A distraction as opposed to traction. Reactive, and I think this is where we come back to mindfulness, reactive is often, okay, when the distractor pops up, right? Or just the mind wandering, whatever it is, the different thought, the buzz from the phone, the email, right? Those sorts of things, the teammate, the fan. Do we have the capacity to catch it or notice it, right? Mindfully notice it and then pause and react to it in a way that is sort of values aligned and goals aligned as well, right? And in doing so, we then can hopefully sustain our attention and increase the likelihood that we'll get into deeper states of engagement.
I think this underlies this point that awareness and attention are always interacting in complex ways, and they're shaping our perception and our experience of the world. So when you think of awareness, it's kind of a broad context, right, where we're conscious of all this stimuli, internal, external experience, but then attention, think of it more like a mechanism where we can select what the specific elements that we need to pay attention to and bring into our primary field of awareness, right, and focus on more deeply. Right? What I always say is like, as a batter, you better have a narrow externalized focus of attention on the release of the ball. You better pick that up as quickly as possible. If it's anywhere else, if you're getting caught up with the noise, I'm not saying it's not in the background of your consciousness. We're aware of it, but that's just noise. We need to be able to dial into the signal.
Yeah. So it's part mindfulness, it's part distraction mitigation, it's part and sometimes emotional regulation. And then I might add, there's sometimes different ways we can gamify or introduce different triggers or variables to an experience that will help create more dopamine, more norepinephrine. So a lot of you will recognize common examples: pattern recognition, risk, competition, creativity, challenge level. Like those are things that force us to pay deeper attention to whatever it is that we're doing, right? Mm-hmm. What would you throw out there in terms of like tangible, kind of where's the juice worth the squeeze action steps to help somebody gain better control over the type and depth of attention? There's really kind of a couple options. You can change a situation or experience, or you can change the way you think about a situation or experience. Okay, so let's take the latter first. So in an athletics contest, right, I'm an 80s baby, so let's take Michael Jordan beating up on my Pistons throughout most of the 90s, right? Let's say it's the season where the Bulls get their 72 wins and set the record and they're just bashing everybody, and so MJ comes out in a typical game and he's bored, right? He's disinterested, it's not very high level of challenge, there's not much risk involved. And so what did we learn, especially in The Last Dance, that Jordan would often do? He would actually make up narratives about what an opponent had said to him or called him or somehow insulted him. Well, why? Because that would actually somehow change his state and change his level of attention. He would get a little angry, right? He would become more competitive. He would perceive more risk involved. And so it's a way of changing his view of an environment that actually increases his capacity to pay attention and get deeply engaged in the state that he needs to be. So that's changing how you view it, right? How might you practice changing the experience yourself this is where you want to use what we will commonly refer to as like dopamine facilitators. And so the simple idea here is what grabs your attention, okay? Create a list, take those things, insert them into batting practice, insert them into your fitness routines, insert them into your recovery routines, right? How do I use risk? Well, if I don't do my recovery, if I don't get into the batting cage for X amount of hours, right, my coach is going to hold me accountable. Cool, that's risk, right? That's part of the way to pay attention. How do we insert and gamify with creativity, with a sense of passion, like I said, with pattern recognition, with levels of challenge, raising or lowering. So for me, you change the experience to have more dopamine, or you change how you're viewing the experience to facilitate some of that neurochemistry as well.
It's a good way. I didn't even think about framing it that way. But when you're talking, I think one thing we talk a lot about is deliberate practice. I don't know if this fits what you're.
Yeah, that's good. Erickson. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's a good example.
If we look at Anders Ericsson work, where he looks at deliberate practice, where it's a highly structured, fully engaged with very specific goals of improving performance. But along with that comes a very concentrated focus. You're dealing with things like immediate feedback. You're dealing with things with different types of repetition, and there's a refinement of skill sets. So I think when it comes to skill acquisition, enhancing performance, I think these things could have profound improvements, not only in terms of your ability to perform, but also I think in terms of your experience and joy in pursuing that excellence. And what I mean by that is I have plenty of athletes who, particularly when they're pressing really hard or not performing optimally, they will continually practice way more than they need to alleviate their sense of ill-being, right, or their stress. And if anything, it is not only is it not helping their performance, but in many ways they're probably ingraining less than optimal motor patterns in so doing. So I think deliberate practice really hones that skill of mindfulness and purpose and intention in a way that we know research, supports it. Present moment awareness, non-judgmental observation. Acceptance. There's a level of compassion in all these processes, but it comes down to also performing well.
Well, I would say I think that's an important distinction between mindfulness and attention. Mindfulness might be non-judgmental, but oftentimes attention should not be. There is a performance element of this, right? You mentioned immediate feedback, so on some level there has to be some sense of scoreboard or judgment, so you can take the feedback as either positive or negative and make subsequent adjustments, right? But I love the point. It's well made. Deliberate practice is about creating scaffolding, right? Consistent scaffolding time after time to find that optimal level of challenge, that optimal amount and type of feedback, and to create that incremental growth in a way that I think is very natural for attention. And so for those listening, Adam mentioned Anders Ericsson, deliberate practice is the term. He's got a book called Peak where he goes through these details. Really, really excellent reading. That's it for now, and talking about awareness and attention in athletic contexts. Again, if you want to get into some of this nerdier stuff and the deeper kind of nuances of awareness and attention, check out the main podcast. This is really focused today, this session, on just making sure that you parents, athletic directors, coaches, athletes, whoever it might be, can take these ideas and immediately start to practice. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.